Hello, I'm Laurie Lane-Zucker, founder and CEO of Impact Entrepreneur, and I am very thankful to Stanford University and VLab for asking me to participate as interviewer and moderator for the Deep Impact program. I'm excited for this discussion of the impact space to introduce you to some of the transformative work to align capitalism with social and environmental health. I had the pleasure of interviewing Sir Ronald Cohen last year, just when his new book had appeared, and I'm delighted to see the book has become a very important touchstone for the impact investing movement and a terrific introduction to impact for those who may not be familiar with this very fast-growing area of finance. Let me briefly introduce Sir Ronald Cohen to you. Sir Ronald Cohen is a pioneering philanthropist, venture capitalist, private equity investor, and social investor. He is recognized as a father of impact investment and European venture capital and is driving forward the global impact revolution. He serves as chairman of the Global Steering Group for Impact Investment, the Impact Weighted Accounts Initiative at Harvard Business School, and the Portland Trust. He is a co-founder and former executive chairman of Apax Partners Worldwide, a global private equity firm. He's also co-founder of Social Finance UK, USA, and Israel, and co-founder chair of Bridges Fund Management, and former co-founding chair of Big Society Capital. His book that I mentioned earlier is Impact: Reshaping Capitalism to Drive Real Change, which was published by Penguin Random House last year. So Ronnie, thank you for joining us. It's a real pleasure to see you again.
Likewise, Laurie, good to see you.
So Ronnie, the subtitle for the program is Saving Capitalism with B Corps, Benefit Corporations, and Impact Investing. And the subtitle of your book is Reshaping Capitalism to Drive Real Change. So my first question is, why does capitalism need saving? And what, in your eyes, is real change? And can you answer these questions a little bit by sharing your career path as a venture capitalist and then as an impact investing pioneer?
So I started off in my mid-20s on the path of venture capital. And I did so for two reasons. One, I could see that technology and entrepreneurship were going to bring huge innovation. And I sensed that something major was happening. I also needed to be financially independent. My parents and our family were kicked out of Egypt as refugees. I was 11 at the time. This was after the Suez crisis. And I knew I would have to look after my parents eventually. At the same time, I felt that venture capital was a way of creating jobs in the UK when there were millions of people unemployed. So if you like, the concept of doing good and doing well was very much part of my thinking when I got into venture capital. But then, to answer your question, I realized as the years went by that although I was helping people from modest backgrounds become very wealthy and make people around them in their companies and around their companies very wealthy too, it wasn't really solving the issue of the big inequalities that exist within our society. And so at the age of 53, I said to my partners, look, I'm going to leave at the age of 60. I'll prepare a constitution for the firm. I'll hand over the firm to my partners. And I want to deal with more important things. I want to deal with social issues and with the Middle East conflict. My wife is Israeli. I was born in Egypt. I speak both Arabic and Hebrew a lot better than Arabic, and I understand the two cultures. And so I thought I had a contribution to make that. Now, I set off on the path to impact investment in 2000 when I was still leading Apax, because I got a call from the British government asking me to look at poverty and why governments haven't been able to make a bigger dent in reducing it despite all the resources they've thrown at it. And in 2000, we published a report, as you know, Laurie, basically saying the reason poverty continues to persist is we've tried to deal with it through government allocating money and philanthropists giving grants. We've never sought to bring investment to resolving social issues more broadly. And it set me off on the path to impact investment. And 10 years later, in 2010, the team had put together at Social Finance UK with several friends, discovered or invented the social impact bond. And the social impact bond was the first time that we could have a financial security where the return depended on achieving a social outcome. So in this particular case, rehabilitating young prisoners, 60% of whom went straight back to jail after their release. Social impact bonds are now over 235 countries, tackling 15 social issues, optimizes risk, return, and impact, Laurie. And when I was asked to chair the G8 task force by the British government in 2013, and we began to work through all the G7 countries and Australia, I began to realize that the world was shifting in the direction of risk, return, impact. 10 trillion in those days, 7 years ago, was in ESG investing. Today, the figure is estimated to be between 40 and 70 trillion. 40 trillion had signed up to the UN PRI. Today, the figure is over 100 trillion. There was no impact investing defined as having the same intention as ESG, but measuring the impact created. Today, the figure is a trillion. And so I began to realize that what was happening was a change in our system. And the change was arising because people were beginning to realize, initially young people, that the system was creating more negative consequences than it should. We were endangering our lives on the planet, and we were endangering the cohesion of our society through inequalities, and businesses were creating and aggravating these problems in their sole search for profit. And so I began to realize that our economic system was beginning to change out of necessity. That if we wanted to bring companies and investors alongside governments in helping us to solve the big issues that we face today, then we would need to shift to risk, return, impact. And we would need, therefore, to start measuring impact in a similar way that we measure profit. And of course, what we've seen now is this impact revolution break out into the open. Everyone saw the ExxonMobil rebellion, where 3 directors were kicked off the board and replaced with people who understand environmental issues better. Many people saw the Procter & Gamble rebellion, where 2/3 of shareholders voted against the management of P&G because of the deforestation its use of palm oil is creating. And many will have seen the judgment against Shell in the Netherlands, saying that it has a duty of care for the environment, very important words, and that it must reduce its carbon emissions by 45% before the end of the decade. So capitalism needs reshaping because it has become self-destructive in its current form. It has certainly helped to bring billions out of poverty, but today it's creating consequences that are so great that even governments can't cope with them.
The impact investing space has been growing at a rather stupendous rate in recent years. It's also undergone quite a lot of innovation. And I'm wondering if you could share for example, your work around social impact bonds is a very important innovation in the space. And there's been even more experimentation and innovation. Philanthropy sector has been getting more involved through the use of program-related investments, mission-related investments, helping with early stage higher risk capital. And that's really started to come on in the last few years. Donor advised funds, the use of those. I'd love to hear your thoughts on maybe some other recent innovations that you find to be most exciting.
But I think what's most exciting, since you and I spoke about a year ago, Laurie, is that pay for success has come to the mainstream bond market. Now, people haven't looked at the bond market much, I expect, but today, social bonds, sustainable bonds, and green bonds funding companies account for $1.5 trillion. And the big innovation coming from impact investing into this field is the appearance of pay for success bonds based on the impact created. So Enel, the big Italian utility company, one of the biggest companies in Italy, has issued $7 billion of pay for success green bonds, where the rate of interest it pays on the bond falls if it achieves certain environmental targets that are set out. Novartis, the big pharmaceutical company, has issued 1.8 billion euros of bonds, where the rate of interest again falls if 25% of its sales reach more vulnerable populations. I think this is extremely significant, Laurie. As you know from our last conversation, I think the only way for us to deal with these big issues that face us is by bringing financial markets and companies to help bring the solutions. I said many years ago that the bond market could bring $10 trillion in impact measured bonds. And now we're beginning to see that happen. The next big step is to bring transparency to public equities and private equities. But there's $100 trillion of public company money in the world on stock exchanges. And if we can bring transparency to that, and many people are worried about greenwashing, but don't realize that impact accounting is a reality today. It's feasible. Impact accounting data is already being used by some investors. If we can bring that, then you can bring an answer to the question, where are we going to find 30 trillion to achieve the SDGs?
I'm wondering, how might a traditional limited partner in private equity, a hedge fund, or a VC transition into impact investing?
What we're beginning to see is that investors are driving this revolution forward now. It started with young consumers and talent who refused to work or purchase the products of companies that were creating harm. And it's now shifted to investors, and investors are changing the behavior of companies. So an LP today, by seeking out managers who place impact at the center of their investment process, seeking to beat returns. I believe risk return impact, as you know, will deliver better returns because of the changed values that we've been talking about, than just optimizing risk return. So I don't think there's a necessary trade-off between achieving impact and profit. Of course, there will be some opportunities that investors can pick and choose from, where you can achieve huge impact but not much profit. But broadly speaking, if you're a fossil fuel company today, you've got real problems. You've got to shift in the direction of positive impact, or like Exxon, you're going to see your share price fall by 2/3 in 3 years. And if you go in the direction of clean, you invest in Tesla and you see the share price multiply 7 times in a single year. So LPs can find today investment groups that are authentic in their understanding and their pitches to raise investor money.
Why should an entrepreneur consider impact investment for his or her business?
Most young entrepreneurs think that impact is increasingly necessary. We see imaginative new ventures seeking to bring education to the masses in ways that we couldn't contemplate before the new technologies made that possible. We see the same thing in remote health. We see the property area, we see housing disrupted by new models where young entrepreneurs are imagining different types of communities. We see fintech platforms being created to serve the most vulnerable instead of charging them the most. And these revolutionary disruptors are going to do to big business what tech did, starting 3-4 decades ago. They're going to change the business models, as Tesla has done, for example. So I think entrepreneurs, young entrepreneurs in particular, are naturally drawn to the idea of doing good and doing well, but they're beginning to realize that it's a better way of attracting talent, customers, and investors.
My last question is about the importance and the role of impact measurement and management in the impact space. I mean, obviously, it's not impact unless you can measure it, right? And can share that with your various stakeholders and your shareholders. Can you talk more about the role of impact measurement and management?
If you look at how companies are reporting today on their impacts, they're being selective. They are reporting mainly in qualitative terms, sometimes using some metrics. It makes it impossible for us to compare the impact performance of different companies and to compare it with their profitability. If, as I believe, there's going to be a link between delivering impact and attracting talent and customers and investors, then there's clearly a competitive advantage building up, and we want to be able to measure it through data. Now, most people are unaware that technology enables us to measure in a granular way the impact that a company creates through its operations on the environment, through its employment on people, and through its products on people and the environment. But it is being done. Impact accounting is here. You can go to the Harvard Business School site, IWA's Impact Weighted Accounts, and you can see 3,000 companies' environmental footprint today, meaning the environmental damage that they cause through their operations. Now, 450 of these 3,000 companies create more damage than profit in a year. Nearly 1,000 create damage equivalent to 25% or more of their profit. Together, they create $4 trillion worth of environmental damage in a single year. And most importantly, Laurie, and this is why it's inevitable we're going to get to impact accounting, is you can see a correlation now between high levels of pollution and lower stock market valuations of companies in many sectors. So regulators are going to have to focus on giving investors the same impact information on a comparable, verified basis at the same time. And we see that process has already started. You see IOSCO, which brings together the world's regulators addressing the issue of transparency. You see the SEC investigating now the question of mandatory climate disclosures. You see the organization that's responsible for financial accounting across the globe, aside from the US, IFRSF, examining the setting up of a sustainable accounting standards board. So the train has left the station on impact measurement now. And within 3 to 5 years, in my view, we're going to have mandatory publication by companies of impact-weighted accounts.
So Ronnie, you mentioned remote health and telehealth. Could you comment on the potential for telehealth to reduce health inequities in medically underserved areas?
Of course, this is going to be a huge area, Laurie. We are beginning to see all sorts of ventures in the area of remote diagnosis of problems. We are beginning to find drugs delivered by drones to remote places in rural villages in Africa. Our ability today to treat people remotely, especially after the experience of having to do so through COVID, has increased hugely. I think it has huge potential.
Can you talk about B-Lab and its importance to the impact movement?
It's very important that investors and the talent and consumers, for that matter, be able to recognize companies that are genuinely delivering positive impact and that have the processes in place to ensure that they continue to do so. And the B-Lab, B Corp movement has been extremely important in putting us on the path to achieving this. If we're going to move in the direction of impact accounting, then it's equally true that we are going to have to change the obligations of company directors and indeed of pension fund and endowment trustees, shifting them away from a framework where even if the legislation doesn't oblige them to optimize risk return only, nevertheless, their perception is that they're in the business of delivering profit only. And we need to send clear legal signals that empower trustees and company directors to optimize risk return and impact. And I salute Andrew and his co-founders at B-Lab because they've really opened the way forward to this understanding.
Is about rate of return in impact. I'd love to hear kind of your numbers of your rate of return in your funds, and also in general for impact investing. What kinds of returns are we seeing and can be expected?
That there is no trade-off. Quite the opposite. Values have changed, and if you want to attract talent, then the fact that you're delivering impact is a very big magnet for talent. And investors are going in this direction too, and soon customers will be doing the same. And so, whereas previously you might have invested in a company which has a software to manage in a better way public transport, today you would also be measuring the carbon emission reduction that you're achieving, the reduction in commuter time for the more vulnerable people who typically commute, better lives for the drivers who are not, because of inefficiency, forced to work over long hours, and perhaps a reduction in accidents. And so a lot of companies are delivering impact already without actually targeting it and measuring their performance, and they're beginning to do so. So when you begin to think in these sorts of terms, you begin to optimize your ability to deliver profit and impact at the same time, and that is going to be the winning model of of this generation of entrepreneurs.
So Ronnie, retail investors, what opportunities exist for retail investors in impact investing?
So it's a nascent area today. It's mainly in private asset classes, Laurie, and it isn't therefore very appropriate for retail investors. We need to shift to quoted vehicles that enable investors to get in and out easily. And I think that's probably going to take a bit of time. We are seeing some crowdfunding of social impact bonds in Israel. About $300,000 was raised for a social impact bond through crowdfunding for the first time, still a small amount of money. It's illiquid, but some investors were prepared to put the money out. I think it's going to be a while before we have public companies publishing sufficient impact information that impact investors can invest from retail. On the other hand, we have ESG now. It doesn't measure its impact as impact investment does, but it seeks to achieve the same goal. And as I was saying earlier, we're going to see measurement coming to ESG in the form of impact accounting. So I think for now, retail probably needs to go in the direction of ESG.
Further question for the entrepreneurs: what practical steps can they take to attract impact capital?
I think the best thing that you can do today is to incorporate in your pitch to investors a comprehensive approach to achieving impact. Are you going to achieve it by picking certain themes like education or clean energy and so on and so forth? Are you committed to measuring the impacts that your companies create and to report on them? The push is coming from investors today. So make yourself as visible as you can in terms of impact. I'm hopeful that the venture capital associations of different countries would begin to highlight their membership that's interested in impact and give entrepreneurs and fund managers a bit more visibility.
The train has left the station. We invite you all to climb on board. The book is Impact: Reshaping Capitalism to Drive Real Change. It is out there. It is available. Penguin Random House is the publisher. Sir Ronnie, thank you so much for joining me and the Deep Impact Conference today. Really appreciate it.
Great pleasure, Laurie. Always great to talk with you.